So tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about teachers. I thought I might as well teach on teachers. Never heard that before. So we know Ephesians 4:11. Excuse me. We know this verse well, where it says, "So Christ himself gave the apostles, some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some as pastors and teachers." And so we know that the office of a teacher is part of what we call the fivefold ministry. Okay, we know there's a lot of other different ministries. There's a lot of other different the administration, the work of helps. There's a lot of different other things, but a teacher is also one of those ministries. However, if you are a parent, an employer, a supervisor, if you're a pet owner, you're a teacher. Okay? You teach. So everyone at some point is a teacher. Okay? Even if you just go about your day, somebody is learning by your actions, about what you're saying, about what you're doing, your reflection. So somehow, some way you're going to teach. Okay? Now, given that, there are certain ones that are hardwired. Okay? And a hardwired teacher is interesting, because I can say that because I am one. Okay, someone can say, the sky is blue today. And a hardwired teacher would say, yeah, it's because it's the particles in the atmosphere and the water and the way the sun shines down that makes it blue. Now, before the flood, the atmosphere was different and the sky was pink. You just poke them and they're going to teach. Because they love trivia, have something to say about everything, and everything is a teaching moment. Okay? Those people are in the office of a teacher. Okay? Now, the scripture says in James 3:1, it says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." And a lot of people say, well, because of that, I can't teach. Okay? We're not supposed to all be teachers. So does that mean we're not supposed to teach? Well, go back to the Great Commission. How are we to go and make disciples of everyone if we can't teach them? So just by the commandment to go and make disciples means we have to teach converts to follow the teachings and ways of Christ. Okay? So it just means that not everyone is called to the office of a teacher. And those who are called are held to a higher level of responsibility for those that they teach. Okay? But if we go back to James, look at where this verse is sandwiched. James 2 is all about faith without works is dead. It's all about you have to have faith, you have to know what faith is, but you also have to do it or you're dead. So faith without works is dead. And in James 3, it's all about the tongue and how it's hard to tame. And right between those two verses is this little tiny verse about a teacher. Okay? So a teacher has to teach how to put things into practice while knowing all the time that their tongue can build up or tear down. Okay? So it just seems like this little verse is out of place until you look at the big whole picture. A teacher has to teach practical ways of doing things. But their tongues are those that build up or tear down. Okay, the key is to understand the needs of the person and teach in the way that person can best understand. Okay, so a good teacher will know who you're talking to and how can they understand. And a good teacher is always known by the results of the students. And I'm not talking about paper exams, okay, or memorization, or acting like a teacher. I'm talking about how do they put into practical practice in their everyday lives what that teacher is teaching them. Okay? Keith Moore, I was listening to him the other day, and he was taken to heaven right after about 3 weeks after his dad had died. And he was taken up there just to talk to his dad, and they were walking down the street in where the shops are at. And all of a sudden, a couple of guys stopped him and they said, Brother Keith. And he said, he stopped and they said, what is the answer to 1,000 questions? Be led. Well, Keith Moore had taught that and still teaches that. And so this is a quote he had taught over and over and over again. Okay, the guys had not only put it into practice while they were on earth, but they had taken that lesson, and the impact in that lesson was still being manifested in heaven after they had passed away. So good lessons and the things that we're teaching are not just for the earth. They're for when we get to heaven, when we get to the cloud of witnesses. It's for what we're going to do then. If you're teaching a person to be a teacher, they're going to, and they're called to be a teacher, they're going to teach. And after they're gone, after the cloud of witnesses, right? The giftings and callings never stop. And teaching people to flag and to worship. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to worship when they get to heaven. How are they going to learn that? They learned it through her on earth. So those lessons still carry on, even into heaven and even into the spiritual realm. Okay, so what we do is very, very important. We often say, that we're in boot camp when we're on the earth and we're in training. Well, if you're in training, who teaches you? The teacher. So that lesson will carry on. It's not just well, I don't want to, or I can't, or, whatever. This is important. It's very, very important. So the true test is if a person understands or not, if they truly have understood this lesson, if they truly know what you're teaching them, is if they can say it back to you in their own words, not memorization, but in their own words, or if they can perform the job with their own mannerisms. So like when you can memorize every verse in the Bible, but until you can say it back in your own words, and then you don't really know what it's saying because you're just saying it by rote. A person can get up there and mimic Anne with her flags all night long, but when they start putting their personality and their movements into those flags, then you know that it's caught because it comes from their heart. Okay? So it's really important. Growing up, most of you always know I always wanted to be a medical doctor. I still like medical stuff. I still like medical shows. So I've been watching the show. And the residents are supposed to be teaching the interns all the procedures. The only problem is the residents want to do all the stuff themselves. Okay? So then when there's this emergency and this guy's coming in, he's bleeding all over the place, and they need the residents to perform the more complicated procedures, the interns didn't know how to put in an IV, and they didn't know how to intubate because they hadn't been taught. Oh, just watch us. It'll be okay. Just watch. Stand back. Let me do it. So you can explain a dozen times about putting an RV, starting an IV. But if a person they have to feel that vein. They have to know what it feels like to put the needle in right, where it goes in the vein and not through the vein. You have to be able to feel it. And the only way to do that is to practice. And the only way to do that is to learn. And the way to do that is to be taught. Okay? If the teacher doesn't want to teach, or they just say stand back, they're never going to learn. Okay? You can look at pictures all day long. But when you're actually trying to intubate somebody, you better know the difference between a trach and an esophagus. Because I tell you can't breathe through the stomach. Okay? Just saying. You don't want a doctor. You don't want any kind of doctor who just has book learning. You want a doctor that has hands-on experience. Okay? So, and how do you do that? That doctor has to have teachers to teach him, and then he has to do it. And that's all what teaching is. Okay? There can be different techniques. The technique isn't the issue, most of the time, but you have to achieve the right outcome. Okay? Like I said, when Johnny was 4 months old, he had surgery on his head, and they did an incision from one ear to the other ear, right across the top of his head. And so he did it at Children's, and so that's a teaching hospital. So they had the residents close them up. Well, one intern or one resident, whoever did it, they did a blanket stitch from one ear to the top of his head. The other one did a baseball stitch from the other ear to the top of his head. Now his head was closed, but those of you who know quilting, it looked quite funny. And the blanket stitch actually got infected. But anyway, that's besides the point. But they had different stitches, different techniques, but the end result was his head was closed up. Mostly. Okay, no. His head was closed up. So, and when he was younger, you could actually see the way the scars looked different. So it might look different, but the end result was the correct result. Does that make sense? Okay, so everyone learns differently. That's why it's so important to have different types of teachers and different types of teaching styles. Okay? Now, you guys know I have 2 kids that we homeschooled, Stephen and Johnny. Stephen, he's more like me. Methodical. He goes through the lessons. He was mathematically inclined, so he was no problem. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Johnny is more like his father, out of the box. I just had to learn to teach differently. They both were smart. They both had the intellectual capacity, but you have to be able to teach them the way that they need to learn, so they can absorb it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now you can go to homeschool convention and you can really see it, because there's all kinds of teaching and teaching styles and teaching methods. Some do traditional lessons, some classical. They have to do all the Latin and the literature and all this stuff. Some do hands-on teaching as they go through the day. We're not going to go to the grocery store today so we can learn math. I had a friend. She loved games and activities. She's always doing crafts with her kids. The way that her kids learned the letters is she had everybody get on, or one person get on the stairs and to look down the stair railing, and the other kids would lay on the ground and make letters with their bodies. And that's how they learn their letters, is by some of them using their bodies to make the letters, or one person saying, oh, that looks like a B. Oh, that's a C, Or, oh, you're bending backwards. What is that? Okay, anyway. But it's through games and activities and crafts. Okay? Some people are tactile, and so when you need to let them glue beans or rice or something to the paper so that they can feel the letters and see. It's just how they learn. There's no right or wrong. It's just teaching them appropriately. Okay, some of the homeschoolers, and I guess everybody, some emphasize academics. Some emphasize their character. Some focus on career choices. Okay, it's not right or wrong. The end result is that they're educated. Okay, and just like I am firmly convinced that God created each person individually in their mother's womb. No 2 people are alike, but He purposely made each of us exactly the way we're supposed to be. I also am firmly convinced that He placed that baby in the correct family with the correct parents so that they can be brought up and trained in the way that they should go. Okay? And I also believe, in the same manner, that God places specific teachers in the lives of specific people to train them and disciple them in the way that they should go. God doesn't do things by mistake. And so there's a reason for it. All we have to do is discover the reasons. Okay? So, that being said, it is very important for us as teachers not to try to be like some other teacher. We can learn from them. We can take traits that we like from others. But we need to discover in ourselves our own strengths and our own methods, because they're exactly what someone else will need. Okay? So don't try and be a mini-me. Try and be you, who God created you to be. Not everyone is a line-by-line, precept upon precept teacher. Okay? Jesus taught in parables and stories. Paul, he taught through writings and articles. David taught through psalms and music. John taught by love and example. Daniel, he taught through the knowledge and the practice of the educational system of that time. Okay? He was a teacher in the college, university of Babylon. And he even made his own school. Okay? Isaiah and Ezekiel, they taught by becoming the lesson themselves. I mean, come on. If Isaiah, he walked around naked, and if somebody asked him, why are you naked? Well, this is why. This is what God's telling. Why is Ezekiel laying on one side and then the other? And they'd have to come and talk to him. Why aren't you up and doing what you're supposed to be doing? And he'd have to tell them why. They became the lesson. Okay? Every one of them are different, but every one of them are important. So 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through 22, it says, for though I am free from all, this is Paul talking, I have made myself a slave to all so that I may win more. And to the Jews, I became as a Jew so that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, though not being myself under the law, so that I might win some who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so I might win those who are without law. To the weak I become weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that I may by all means save some. So Paul, that whole long discourse is just saying, I'm going to be whatever I need to be so I can teach whoever needs to be taught. Okay? There's one of my favorite stories is about this kid, and this is really a true story. And he was slow, to put it nicely, but he felt he was called to preach. So he kept begging his pastor, I want to preach. Let me preach. And the pastor kept putting him off, and the kid kept coming, let me preach. I'm called to preach. Let me preach. So finally, the pastor said, okay, you can preach. Here comes, and he had looked on the calendar. It was a Sunday night, which a lot of people don't come on Sunday nights. It was a holiday weekend. So it had been a really, really light crowd. So he's like, this is a safe night. Nobody's going to be here. Okay, you can preach this night. So the kid was all excited. I mean, he was going, he was fasting, he was praying, he was studying, he was going through all the motions every Sunday, every Wednesday. He'd be telling his pastor, I'm really praying about this, and I'm really fasting about this, and, Well, one day the pastor got a phone call, and it was the big lawyer in town that he had been going and drinking coffee with quite a few mornings and trying to get him to come to the church. And the lawyer wouldn't come to the church, and the pastor kept inviting him and going and drinking coffee with him in the mornings and talking to him. And he called him and he said, Pastor, I've decided I'm going to come visit your church on Sunday night. And the pastor goes, oh, man, how am I going to tell this kid he can't preach? Here comes the kid Sunday morning. Pastor, I just know I got the right sermon. I know God gave me the exact sermon for tonight. Pastor said, there is no way I can tell this kid no. So sure enough, that night, here comes the big lawyer. And he comes down, he sits right down in the front row. And the pastor's just cringing. And the boy did not disappoint the pastor. He opened up the Bible and he gave the reference, and it was the genealogy. Adam lived so many years, and he begat Seth, and he lived so many years, and he died. And Seth lived so many years. And he went on down, and he was struggling over there. Because, you got down to Enoch, and Enoch begat Methuselah. And he was struggling over the names. Methuselah lived so many years, and he begat Lamech, and he lived 9 years, and died. And Lamech lived so many years and begat Noah. And Lamech lived so many years and died, and Noah lived 500 years, and he begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then he closed his Bible. Okay, if anybody wants to get saved, the altar is open, and I will come and pray with you. All the while the pastor's cringing more and more down in his seat. And the lawyer jumped out of his chair, out of the front pew, hit the altar with his knees, and was just crying and repenting and gave his life to the Lord. And the pastor's just like, what was that? So afterward, he couldn't resist. He finally said, he asked that lawyer, he said, what in the world did you get out of that sermon? And the lawyer said, I am a lawyer. He said, what I got was everybody lived, they had kids, and they died. He said, I have lived. I have had kids. All that's left is for me to die. I better get right. Okay. Now, that is really a true story, okay? But it's one of my favorite stories. But, again, the key is to find the best way to get your point across. And if the pastor had gone up there and gave an eloquent sermon with all the references and everything else, it wouldn't have touched the lawyer at all. But the lawyer figured it out, no matter what the hard names were. You live, you have kids, you die. I have lived, I have had kids. Next on the agenda is I die. Okay? So, find the best way to get your point across. Yeah? Okay, and that is a good teacher. Your goal is not to make someone your mini-me. Okay? Your goal is to bring this person into the fullness of who God has created them to be, so they can complete their calling and their purpose. Not your calling, not your purpose. Their calling, their purpose. So, let's just look. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah. Let's look. There's 5 major teaching styles. I am not telling you these styles so that you can say, I'm going to plug in here and here and here. I'm telling you these styles because you can mix and match. And you can say, this is what I like to do, this is what I don't like to do. You can maybe glean some ideas of what trips your trigger through this, okay? So these are the 5 major teaching styles. 1 is authority. That's the lecture type. That's what I'm doing now. It's a one-way discussion, okay? I'm lecturing. 2, tell me if I go too fast, because you know me. 2 is the delegator. Okay, the delegator is the group style learning. Let's all have small groups. Let's all get together and discuss. It's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. Okay, let's talk it through. A facilitator is number 3. That's teaching while doing. It's hands-on. It's activity-based. It's like an apprentice. You're doing the work while you're learning how to do it. Facilitator. Number 4 is the demonstrator. They combine the lecture teaching with demonstrations and activities, okay? And number 5 is the hybrid, okay? The hybrid is an integrated teaching. It incorporates the teacher's personality and preference and interest, okay? And a lot of times it'll incorporate extracurricular knowledge to develop deeper understanding. And let me give you an example of all these, okay? So say you're teaching earth science, okay? The authority teacher will just lecture all about earth science, okay? The delegator will go in and they'll assign groups. They'll get the students in groups and assign them projects for them to present to the class. Okay? The facilitator will take the class outside and explain the biology and the botany and the minerals and everything as they see it. Okay? The demonstrator will lecture, and then let's have experiments to bring it all together. Now, the hybrid will show how the earth proves that the world flood, and how the earth proves that there was a world flood, and how the world flood changed the earth. Okay, because that's the interest of the teacher, but it's still teaching earth science. Okay? But you know that flood, it can prove everything. It can prove the geological contours of the earth. It can prove, everything you want to know. The flood can prove it. And he might even bring in the Nephilim just to be good. Okay? That's the hybrid. I think I probably tend more to the hybrid. But anyway, I like those rabbit trails. But you learn how you're not teach or disciple in the way that you're comfortable with. Does that make sense? Okay? So you can be group, one-on-one, precept upon precept, discussion, just the facts, deeper knowledge, whatever is your style, your comfort, that's how you need to teach. Okay? Now you also need to understand that the best way, I wrote that one wrong. Okay. You also need to understand the best way that the person you're working with learns. Okay? How they receive information, how they interpret it and process it, and how they organize it, and how they store it. Okay? And then you need to go with that method or allow them to do their method. Okay? And I'll go through 10 of them, but a prime example is, I'm still going to use you, but Steve, if you look at his Bible, or any of his Bibles, and he has many Bibles, his Bible has pictures in it, and everything underlined, and colored, and highlighted, and after he goes through a page, you can't read it. But it doesn't matter because he is artistic and creative, and he can quote those verses or say those verses or tell you what those verses are because he has the visual picture in his mind, and he knows what the pictures are that he's drawn on there. He knows what he's underlined. He knows the color. So he knows the whole page. He doesn't have to go back and read it anymore. It's an art. It's a picture. And it's in his heart. Okay? Now, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to do that because I have to go back and read it again and again and again because I'm more of a linguist. I'm more of a words person. Okay? Neither is right or wrong. It's how we're hardwired and how God's created us. Okay, so we just have to understand what that learning style is. You know, when the boys I gave them notebooks and said, take notes in church. And we'll have quizzes on what the pastor has been speaking about. And I'd look over there. They'd be drawing pictures. First few times I got really mad. You're not supposed to be drawing pictures. You're supposed to be taking notes. Because if you look at my notes, everything is an outline and numbers and, words. But theirs was pictures. But we get in the car and they could tell you exactly what the pastor said because while they were drawing that picture, they knew what he was saying. And what that picture was told them what the pastor was saying at that particular time. So that's how they learned. So I learn, and I take notes by notes. Vicki takes pretty notes with words and sometimes pictures and doodles and arrows, but it's how can you learn? How can you get it in your heart? Okay? That's what is important. So, 10 learning styles. Number 1 is the physical. It can be called kinesthetic. Okay? Physical is easier. It means hands-on, role-playing. You have a lot of props, a lot of models. You're going to do something. Be active in it. Physical. Number 2 is spatial or visual. I always I do the easy words. Visual. Okay? That means you like charts and images and diagrams and graphs, and you like colors and flow charts. Very visual. Number 3 is auditory. You're going to hear it, and you're saying it out loud or singing it. Okay? It's all with the ear, auditory. You hear it, say it, sing it, listen to it. 4 is verbal. That's your reading, your writing. You learn best through written material or writing it yourself. Okay? Acronyms, rhymes, tongue twisters, all those are really good tools. Okay? For a verbal person. 5 is logical. Okay? Think about math, mathematical, logical. They like to categorize the information into groups. They quickly recognize patterns and sequences, something I was never good at, but they could figure it out quickly. They understand equations, numbers, relationships. They love structure and logic, that cause and effect. Okay? Very logical, linear. Number 6 is musical. They learn better with music and beats and rhythm. Okay? They even tend to think in sounds and rhymes instead of words and pictures. So it's that musical. You go over to Mardell's in the educational system, and you can find CDs with music for the alphabet, for the times tables, for the boys were in junior Bible quiz, and we had tapes with all their verses and music, and you really can learn easily with that if it's set to music. So musical. 7 is the naturalist. They're the one with nature. Okay, they learn through experimentation and practical experience, and they retain that information best when they're outside, or if they're around plants or animals. They're the ones that like the jungles in their house. They're the naturalist, okay? Number 8 is linguistic, which is the combination of the auditory and the verbal. They like to they absorb it by writing it and reading and sounding it out. These are the ones that like to make their own notes when studying. If they want to understand something when they're hearing it and listening, you're writing the notes. Linguistic, Pastor Ron? No. This linguistic is not necessarily the wordsmiths, but it's like when you're taking a lecture. Okay, where you're in a lecture and you tend to like to draw more or draw pictures more, and I tend to write the notes more. The linguistic writes the notes. Okay, so you can hear it while you're hearing it, you're seeing it, and you're actively writing it. Okay, number 9 is that interpersonal. It's a social butterfly. Okay, they learn best in groups with other people. Now the social ones make good leaders. And then the number 10 is the intrapersonal. It's the solitary people. They prefer the solitude while studying. Okay, so they're very independent, introspective. Like I'm more the solitary person. So I don't do good when you say, let's get into groups and discuss it. That is out of my comfort zone. Okay? If you say, take this and study it and come back and take the test, I'm good. Fine. But don't make me interact with people. Okay? Or a pastor that says, now say to the person next to you. I don't want to say to the person next to me. Okay? But some people get a lot out of it. So every person learns a different way, and it's okay. So God's hardwired each of us a different way. And it's okay. And the thing is, the more we understand that about those we're interacting with, you guys know me enough. You sit with me in a conference and they say to the person next to you, you can pretty much bet I'm not going to say to you whatever he says. I'll write it down. I'll put an exclamation point beside it. Okay? Now, you may be the social one and you may say, Debbie, and say it. I'm fine with that. Say it all you want. But for me, I'll write it. Okay? But it's okay. We're hardwired different. But that's why it's also important for a training facility like Spirit of Life, that we have different methods and different teachers to train and disciple in different ways. Because we're here for the whole body, not just a certain type. Okay? We're not to put people in boxes, but we're actually to have the adventure and the excitement of discovering every person's strengths, their weaknesses, their giftings, their callings. And yes, I did say their weaknesses, okay? Because their strengths and their weaknesses are equally important. Okay? And what might be perceived as a weakness to one may be a strength to someone else, okay? I'm going to use you again because you're the easiest one. Okay. I'm very logical. I mean, it's true. Steve and I are pretty much opposite. Okay, when we first got married, I prayed for 10 years. Lord, why? What were you thinking? Now I understand it. Okay? But I was like, we were totally opposite. I'm very logical, structured, organized. Steve is very artistic, creative, spontaneous, free spirit. We were talking about that this morning, weren't we? Okay. Bohemian. Yeah. I called him a bohemian. Okay. Now, I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not. Okay, but because Steve is spontaneous and he can take advantage of every opportunity on the fly, he's a great salesman. He can see an opportunity and he just goes after it. Okay? Because he's creative, he thinks out of the box. Because I'm a linear person, I balance his ideas by thinking through all the pros and cons. Okay, he's out of the box, and I go to the edge of the box and say, well, this will work, and this will work here, and this will work here, but we're not in the box, but we're measuring on the outside of the box, okay? Okay, but in the end, Steve's the one that gets the job done because he's a doer and not just a planner. I can plan all day long. I can think all day long, but Steve's the doer because he's the spontaneous one and the creative one. Okay? He needs me to think it through. I need him to get the job done. Okay? So one weakness is not a weakness, it's a strength. And the strengths are not necessarily strengths, but weaknesses. But because you put them together, it complements each other. Okay? And so because we know how each other works, then we can discuss it, we can teach each other, and we can learn from each other. Does that make sense? Okay? So never think that person is just off their rocker and there's no hope. There's a reason that they're the way they are. Okay? And because they might not be like us, doesn't mean they're wrong. We may be the ones that's wrong. Okay? But we're all teachers in some form. When you guys, every one of you in this room, get behind this pulpit, but when you're in this pulpit, you may be a teacher, or a preacher, or a storyteller, or a demonstrator. It doesn't matter. Just be who God has created you to be, so you can connect to the people that need to hear and learn what your message is. Okay? Then, if we each do that, then the body of Christ may become all things to all men, so that by all means we may save some. Okay, and that's what's important. We may not all be hardwired to be teachers, but we're hardwired to be something. And in the end, we do teach. So be who God's called you to be so that you can bring those that we're discipling into their fullness. We can never bring them into their fullness until we're in our fullness. Does that make sense? So go out, teach, make disciples, and enjoy the process. Amen?